Hey guys, welcome to episode 147 of Stand Up. Joining me today, public defender Scott Heckinger. That interview begins at about 11 minutes after I get done blathering about the news and my weekend activities. And then Ali Velshi. That interview begins about 43 minutes in. My name is Pete Dominick, and now, right now, it's time to stand up. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 147 of Stand Up. Thank you very much for checking me out today. It is Monday. It is the 20th of July, and what a weekend. How was your weekend? I hope you had a good weekend. I didn't really have much of a weekend. I was working outside in the 90-degree heat with two of the most generous angels I've ever met. I want to give a big thanks to my two friends, longtime listeners, and Patreon subscribers, Michael Reese and Nick D. Fabrizio. Nick helped me all day Saturday and Sunday. 63-year-old guy with an awesome set of skills, a brilliant mind, and one of the biggest hearts I've ever met in my life. So generous with his time, so generous with his money. I actually met him while hosting charities, Why Hunger and his charity Kagano. And I love this guy. He is so kind and thoughtful and held my hand all the way through Saturday and Sunday. And Michael Reese is a friend of mine as well that lives in my community. And he has also got a good set of skills. And both these guys are helping me renovate my shed into a studio. We made a lot of progress, but the point I want to make is not only thank you, but it just how good it feels to have people in my life that are so kind and generous. I don't really have a set of skills where I could come help someone do something that would cost a lot of money. I mean, I'll come clean your garage or your basement or mow your lawn. There's a lot of, basic things I can do, and I think I may end up doing them for both these guys if possible, but just to have this set of skills and for them to be helping me as much as they did. We got a lot done, and I'm really excited to be broadcasting from my new shed studio as soon as possible. Still a long way to go, but it's coming along, and I'll post some pictures up if anybody cares. Thank you for all the tips and ideas, and thank you to Nick and Michael for your generosity this weekend. I am so moved by it. Also, Friday night, we had a great get-together on Zoom where our special guest of honor was Dr. Aaron Carroll. He took about 1 billion questions from me and the over 60 paying subscribers that joined me, and what a community it is. We had a great conversation with Aaron. We learned a lot. We laughed a lot, and then we cried a little bit, maybe. At least some of us did, because at the end of the conversation, the last third or so, a whole bunch of listeners, subscribers, parts of the stand-up community just openly talked about their fears, their anxieties, and everything that concerned them, mostly regarding, obviously, COVID-19. And it was just a great night and an amazing group of people. I would love to have you join us at the next one. So if you're not a subscriber, sign up now at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Tomorrow, I'll give the shout-outs for all the new subscribers. A whole bunch of new people just signed up this week and even over the weekend, and I'm excited to get in touch with all of you, learn more about you. I wish I had more time to talk with people, but I try to each and every day, and I really cannot thank you enough. I have an awesome couple of guests joining me today, Scott Hechinger and Ali Velshi. Those are coming up, but just wanted to mention a couple of other things outside of our Zoom chat on Friday night. And by the way, I will share that with everybody, all listeners. I'll play that this week, and I'll make the video available to paying subscribers, many of which were there. Over 60 of you are there with Dr. Aaron Carroll. A lot of people have asked for that. They said they couldn't make it, but they still want to hear it. I'll share the audio here on the podcast, and I'll share the video for paying subscribers. How's that? Good? All right. Okay, so crazy news in the world over the weekend. Of course, Friday we lost one of the greatest Americans in our history, civil rights icon, Congressman John Lewis, died. I was really honored to have had the opportunity to interview him a couple of years ago at the Aspen Ideas Festival. I shared that video yesterday. Thousands of people after his death was announced signed a petition to rename the Selma Bridge after John Lewis. The Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma is what it's named right now, and thousands of people have signed this petition, and I'm going to go do it right after I'm done here. John Lewis helped lead a march for black voting rights across that bridge in 1965, during which he and his fellow protesters had the shit kicked out of him by state troopers in what became known as Bloody Sunday. The brigadier general in the Confederate Army in the Civil War was Edmund Pettus. He later became a Ku Klux Klan leader. I think maybe it's time to rename that bridge after the winners and after this icon, John Lewis. So go sign that petition to rename the Edmund Pettus Bridge to the John Lewis Bridge. Wouldn't that be awesome? Prior to his death, 250,000 signatures, but by Saturday evening, there was over 437,000. I hope you'll go sign that petition. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Also, America lost a lesser-known but hugely significant icon of the civil rights movement on Friday. I'm just learning about Reverend C.T. Vivian, died at the age of 95. His career as a civil rights leader goes back to the 1940s. Sit-in demonstrations. She worked with Dr. King in the 60s, served as national director of affiliates for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and in 2013, he received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Obama, who praised him, saying that he was pushing us closer to our founding ideals. And so we also remember the life of, or learn about it for the first time if you weren't familiar with him, like I wasn't, Reverend C.T. Vivian. And another American hero, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, says her cancer has returned, but she's not going to be retiring. Oh, you got to hold in there for 100 more days. Actually, I don't know what the Constitution says. Can he, Trump that is, if she were to pass away after the election, if Trump lost, does he still have the right constitutionally to appoint someone to replace her? Can Democrats do anything to stop him? Yikes, that is terrifying. Also, Defense Secretary Mark Esper signed a memo last week, Thursday night, specifically listing that Confederate flags are no longer allowed to fly on military bases in the United States of America, even though President Trump basically defended them, said they didn't defend him in a very strange interview with Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. But the Confederate flag is no longer allowed to fly on military families. I was surprised that it was still flown there. Maybe I shouldn't have been. Also, New York City, 40 miles south from where I live, once the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic, is moving to its final phase of reopening. We're getting pretty relaxed here in New York State, where we've done a good job, I think, overall fighting this damn thing. Everybody I know, everybody I see is wearing a mask. I saw a guy at the gas station the other night not wearing a mask, but really, I rarely see, if ever. Meanwhile, things are obviously going in the wrong direction. Arizona, California, and Texas, and the Texas and Florida are not going to shut down businesses again, according to the governors there. The governor of California said Friday most schools will not reopen in the state, and Florida recorded 128 new deaths from COVID-19 on Friday afternoon. Wow. If you're listening in any of those states, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe I could interview you this week. My wife and daughters went away this weekend while we were working on the studio, and they went to the beach, the Jersey Shore, Long Beach Island, and they had a great time. But I on Saturday night, I took like an edible gummy, and I don't know why I keep doing that, because they make me, I think that makes me paranoid, like scary, not like smoking weed, but these specific edible gummies, I shouldn't be taking them. But I flipped out on Saturday night, just being worried about all this stuff. And maybe you do, maybe you flip out and have these, I don't know, episodes of real serious angst without the help of any drugs. And I'm not sure how you deal with it, but let me know, because that was a rough Saturday night for a couple of hours. I was just like locked in this chamber of fear. And I know I'm not alone. I always say that at the end of the show. But if that's you, how do you deal with it, with this insane virus that is not going away anytime soon? In fact, we're still probably at the beginning of this nightmare. The virus is crushing the United States, according to Washington Post, page 1 on Monday. And New York Times has an interesting piece titled "Inside Trump's Rush to Abandon His Leadership Role." Oh, it's a lot. Florida reported over 10,000 new cases for a 5th day in a row. Patients are swamping the ERs. Healthy 13-year-old boy died after experiencing symptoms. 85 babies tested positive in one county in Texas, I believe that was. Yeah, on the Gulf Coast. 85 infants have tested positive for coronavirus. So don't tell me it can't affect kids, and don't tell me it can't make them very sick and even kill them. The schools question is really the top of everybody's mind. I highly recommend that you go back and listen to my conversation last week with Thad Ingram and Andrew Spar of the Florida Education Association. And Dr. Carroll had a lot to say about it in our chat on Friday night. And like I said, I will post that at some point, probably earlier this week. All right, let's get to my guests. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm very excited to bring Scott Heckinger on the show for the first time. He is a public defender who worked for Brooklyn Defender Services for 7 years. And last year, he founded an organization called Zealous, which is an initiative that he created to lead public defenders and using media, movement trainings and events, coordinating policy campaigns. This guy is fascinating, really smart, and I think a hero, not unlike my public defender friends down in New Orleans. As a matter of fact, Barksdale Horton-Stein Jr. actually turned me on to Scott Heckinger, as well as I think a listener. Smart guy, great in this interview, and somebody who I hope to have on a pretty regular basis. We talked about him doing that. Great interview with him coming up right now. He's on Twitter, by the way, where he's a monster. I highly recommend you follow him there. And if you like the interview, tell him you heard him here. It always makes a huge difference. Sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't. Here's my conversation. Coming up, by the way, Ali Velshi right after this. You don't want to miss this. You don't want to miss Ali Velshi. We had an hour-long conversation. But first, about a half an hour now with the great Scott Heckinger. All right, I've got the great Scott Heckinger right now. Scott, really psyched to get you on the podcast for the first time. I've been reading about you, watching you. You come highly recommended, and I'm psyched to have you. Thanks for joining me.
I hope I don't let you down. The great really sets me up for failure, but great to be on. Also way overstates the case. I'm not just being modest, but
I think that's unfair. Even if you shit the bed during this interview, people should go look at your resume and what you've accomplished. So I think we'll be fine. First of all, I just wanted to start by asking you about what is happening in Portland. Not that we know exactly what is happening in Portland, but in general, basically, if people don't know, you're seeing these men in fatigues snatching people off the street and putting them in unmarked, in one case, a minivan, which is kind of funny, except for the part where it's not funny at all. But like they're renting cars, and I guess they have a badge on that says police or something. But we don't know who they are. And so what is the legality of someone walking up and law enforcement, whether federal, state, local, arresting someone without identifying themselves as a law enforcement official?
There's a big difference between what is constitutional, what is legal, and what government officials, the state police officers actually do in practice. Just to step back for a second, when you're looking at these videos in Portland like I am, and you're seeing unidentified government officials who no one knows who they are, picking people off the street, it looks terrifying because it is terrifying. But to put it in perspective, this happens every day in largely Black and brown neighborhoods across the country when undercover officers will come up, not identify themselves, and stop, frisk, and arrest people. It's happening right now around the country during protests, not just in Portland. It was happening in NYPD, where even though these officers were in uniform, and yes, you knew they were from the NYPD, they were covering up their badges so they couldn't be identified, and then squiring people away in unmarked vehicles. And public defenders were having trouble locating where these individuals were, and they were being held for way longer. And so just to put it in perspective, I mean, it's horrifying what's going on in Portland. And Portland police, not many people I feel like know this, have a long history of being ridiculously violent, ridiculously corrupt. And people think of Portland as this progressive place. But as I came to know very well, practicing for close to 10 years in Brooklyn, Brooklyn's also a progressive place. New York's a progressive state, yet we treat largely Black and brown people living only in certain neighborhoods with just abject derision. And when I say we, I mean like our leaders and the police. So no, it's not legal. It's not constitutional. It's terrifying. But it's who, unfortunately, we are as a country when it comes to policing. Well, it's good.
Well, that's terrifying. I'm glad that you took a step back, because you're saying, yeah, this might be new
to some of these protesters who are mostly, or not mostly, I don't know, but a lot of white people. It might be new to people around the nation to see these videos, but it's been happening in black and brown communities for a long time, is what you're saying, it sounds like. But also, forgive me, all I know about this stuff is from interviewing a handful of experts over the years and watching TV. But at some point, if an undercover cop goes over and arrests someone, at some point, does he not have to, or she not have to, take out their badge and say, you're under arrest and here's who I am?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other issue now is we have these crazy, I'm going to call them racist assholes that are dressing up in fatigues and walking out with their own guns like vigilantes. And there is a huge concern that some of the people that are doing some of this and making these arrests might not be law enforcement at all. That seems different and new. I don't know that that's been happening in Brooklyn or anywhere else.
I don't know how widespread that is, but it is it's terrifying. I mean, look, it starts from when you see, it's just one thing that I immediately think of when I see these people dressed up in fatigues with semi-automatic, fully automatic, unclear guns going out and intimidating people is just baseline the distinction in how they're treated. Yes, they might have licenses, and yes, they might be living in open carry states, but the difference between how they're treated and young black teenagers who are caught and charged with simple possession of a firearm, no allegation of use, no allegation of pointing it at any people. And in New York, for example, that's a violent felony. Even if you have no record, the mandatory minimum is 3.5 years. The maximum is 15. And yet, you're seeing terrifying looking white people in fatigues using the guns to intimidate. Just.
But isn't the difference there the in your specific scenario you just laid out, the black kid does not have, his gun is illegal to even have in New York, much less whether it's registered. And this crazy white guy is at least legally permitted to carry that horrible gun.
Yeah, but here's where it goes back to, where is that law actually? Where is that law in place? It's in place in New York. How is it enforced? It's enforced predominantly against black and brown people. And this is not a leveling down. I don't actually want there to be harsh mandatory minimum sentences for these crimes, because inevitably they're going to wind up hurting black and brown people, including in these in these places where you're seeing white vigilantes walking around with this. We need gun control, but it's just to point out just how stark the difference is, right, in how we treat people from one state or one city to another, and traditionally how it falls along color barriers. But the other piece is, yeah, it's terrifying. We don't know who these people are, and they might be these vigilantes. And this comes also on the heel of the news around that the fact that ICE is planning to start a training program for civilians to be able to identify and approach, potentially stop and arrest people who they think are illegal immigrants.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I don't know if you saw this, but there is news.
Didn't. This is the first time hearing of this, and I'm going to vomit.
It is a planned program to have civilians actually trained by ICE officers to essentially be vigilantes. So this is and there's a long history to this. This is not like anything new. This is modern day, like either setting up for attempted lynching. Like this is there's a terror aspect to it. Even if they don't follow through and shoot someone, having white people calling the police. They're now called Karens on Twitter. That's a form of racial terror.
Karens and Chads. I like
Karens and Chads.
Chad for the white guys.
I like that. Chad. Yeah. Poor Chads. Poor Karens.
Yeah, seriously.
My aunt's name is Karen, and she's actually really nice and very not racist.
Well, we'll see about that if she turns up on a viral video at the convenience store for yelling at someone or getting yelled at for not wearing a mask. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but every one of these things that you're seeing online from people just standing there and questioning someone else's rights to be in a park, to people dressed up in fatigues and with guns strapped over their shoulders, to police, despite cameras all around them, strangling people who are protesting them, whether they're black or white, to ICE training people to go out and harass immigrants. This is all a form of terror. It's a form of racial terror that unfortunately, and this fortunately doesn't sound radical or crazy anymore because it's just the truth. It's a history that our country was built on. It was built on racial terror. It was built on slavery, which then translated into Jim Crow, which translated into to lynchings, which translated into the mass incarceration crisis that we now face.
There's so much
connected.
Yeah, it's all connected, and there's a lot of history here, and you're providing quite a bit of perspective on it. So, I originally I wasn't going to be talking about, these first few issues that we talked about, but obviously they're happening in the news right now, and it's terrifying. I'm glad you mentioned the ICE issue. When you hear people like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other, generally speaking, progressive Democrats saying they want to abolish ICE, what do you think of that idea?
I think it's a fantastic one. When you look at the way that ICE is set up, and also recognize that it's a modern, relatively recent invention, and what they actually wind up doing, it's an organization that tears families apart, that imprisons and jails people who are trying to, in most cases, make a living, live, be free, for the purposes of promoting essentially white nationalism. It sounds heavy-handed. It sounds crazy, but we spent a fortune arresting, investigating, jailing, deporting people at, I think, enormous cost to beyond just fiscal cost, not only enormous cost to the individuals and their families, but to the United States, which is built upon this idea that we're better the more diverse we are. It's strange. We're not only built on racial terror, but we're also built on this idea that diversity makes us stronger. It's kind of bizarre, but I think if in the same way, right, that if ICE was providing a social good, was actually making America better, was improving the safety in our communities, was deterring people from entering. I can go on down the road, was rehabilitating in any way. Maybe there would be a case for continuing to invest in a violent, failed strategy. But that's ultimately what it is. And that's the same thing, frankly, as what's going on with the conversations around defunding the police. Defund is a very triggering word, as is abolish.
Yes, they are.
And
my wife thinks it's crazy to be saying those things because she thinks, she's not that into politics. She's the perfect person to kind of weigh in on this. She's like, I understand the goal, but we need to use better language because it turns people off so quickly. And I try to explain it to her, but the point is that's not how media works. That's not how communication works. We live in a social media era, so it's one sentence, one slogan to market an idea. It doesn't really get unpacked. So she thinks it's just going to backfire.
I agree with that. I mean, the people who are right in there about defund are the folks who know a lot about the issues already and already sold.
Right.
There are folks that you're not going to be able to sell, but there's other folks that you can, and it's not just from the social justice and racial justice standpoint. It's from, if you care about fiscal responsibility, if you care about civil liberties, this is an issue for you. I feel like that it should be, maybe a better way to brand it is invest in better solutions, invest in a solution that actually works. If you look at policing across the board, not just being a public defender and having seen how this stuff works, but just looking at the data, looking at the statistics, first of all, the vast majority of things that police actually respond to are nonviolent and are things that derive and come from social issues or social service issues like substance abuse disorder, like mental health issues, like poverty, homelessness. And we just from the 50s, 60s, all the way through the 90s decided that we were going to let our leaders invest our money into crime or criminalization and policing as a solution to all the societal problems. We now know, looking back on that it hasn't helped. It doesn't work. I can tell you as a public defender representing people with literally heavy rap sheets that are filled with dozens of crimes of sleeping on the subway, of stealing a bar of soap, of possession of crack cocaine residue, of trespassing and sleeping, on a steps where they shouldn't be sleeping, and that they keep coming back. That you can't deter poverty. You can't deter poverty with prison. And then for those small percentage of cases where they are responding to violence, number one, most people don't call the police when they're survivors of crime because they don't trust the police and because they actually don't like the outcomes that come from the police coming, either because police wind up escalating the situation or the person who they're calling the police on winds up being criminalized and jailed, and that doesn't actually help heal their trauma. And that doesn't help make them any safer, because what we now know is that prison and jail is what we call criminogenic. The very same characteristics of jails and prisons, which are isolation, shame, economic deprivation, and violence itself, are the primary drivers of violence. And so what happens is you throw a solution at a problem, violence, that actually makes the problem even worse. And 95% of people come out of jail at some point. 600,000 people are released from jails and prisons every year. That's roughly the size of Seattle or Boston. And so first baseline, most people don't call for the police when they need help. When they do call for the police all too often wind up exacerbating and escalating situations instead of making them better. And then the solution that they have, which is arrest through prosecution through the jail and prison, doesn't actually solve violence. And so if you look, across the spectrum,
is what you just said, sorry to interrupt, is what you just said pretty widely held opinion by public defenders across this country and criminal justice experts, or is there a lot of diversity opinion about what you just said?
I can't tell you what I can't speak for all public defenders. What I can tell you is,
I want you to speak for all public defenders, please. Please do. How dare you?
Well, now that you dared me. No, look, what I'll say is, for people that are paying attention and people that are looking at the data, that are looking at the statistics, that know how much more effective violence interruption models that are community-based and led by social workers are for not just responding to violence, but preventing violence in the first place, for those who run restorative justice programs that engage the survivor of the crime with the perpetrator or the person who committed the harm, and see how the recidivism rate is near zero for people that engage in those programs versus very high for those folks that are put away only to be released, whether it's months, years, even a decade later, for folks that live in these communities and represent people in these communities like public defenders. Okay, I'll speak a little bit on behalf of all of us, and see how people feel trapped and caged and incarcerated in their own neighborhoods. Like a 19-year-old young man who I represent, he actually in my head is a young boy, because he looks younger than 19, and is afraid to even walk to his corner bodega to get a sandwich because he doesn't want to get stopped and frisked by the same police. And seeing the trauma of that. And when you hear about people being scared to call the police, and when you look at how much we spend, hundreds of billions of dollars on a losing strategy, if mass incarceration and policing actually worked, the United States would be the safest country in the world in all history, bar none, forever of all time. Right. And it's just not the case.
Right.
And so if you are actually paying attention, let me say, I think it is a crazier prospect that we continue to invest in this dangerous, losing, costly strategy than trying something else. And I think one other piece is we don't have to guess. Like I mentioned a couple of actual models. There are violence prevention models that don't involve the police all across the country. There are pre-arrest diversion programs that that exist all across the country. There are restorative justice programs that work all across the country. There are bail funds that are bailing people out and improving the case that bail not only doesn't make us safer, but it's not required to ensure people's return to court and keep people safe. So you don't need to try to imagine what a world without policing looks like. There are models out there, and also, Pete, you could just go to a white neighborhood. Most white suburbs are not policed, and there isn't a ton of crime, and people get along just fine. And they wind up, when kids get in fights and they might steal one of their cell phones, they call the other parent and they deal with it in a restorative justice approach.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just to give a quick example, like I'm constantly walking my dog with a beer and often high and usually, not usually, but often with pot on me. Like I just walk around my neighborhood. I don't ever even think about it for a second. I've never even seen a cop in my neighborhood just hanging out. I mean, it's just, I just go out and walk for a dog. I don't think about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just an anecdote, but still, I mean, I think that's most white people in the suburbs. Some people might put their beer in a cozy, but
in white, you might take that just additional step, but in white neighborhoods too, in schools that are not over policed, in areas that are over policed, kids do stupid things too. They get in fights, they steal each other's stuff. In Brownsville or Bed-Stuy or East New York, where the majority of the people who I represented came from, that's robbery in the second degree, stealing another kid's cell phone with someone else present. That's mandatory minimum 3.5 years, max 15, and a violent felony record for the rest of your life. Walking down the street with an open container, that's just an administrative code violation in New York City. But what does that also lead to? That leads then to a full-blown stop and frisk, which leads to potentially a charge for resisting arrest, which leads to maybe also a charge of a violent assault on a police officer, because while they were trying to arrest you, they fell down and scuffed their knee, and that's considered an injury enough to charge you with a violent felony. Or in the case of the video that is now making the rounds, they punched you in the face and they have a swollen fist, and your face becomes the weapon that injured their fist.
No.
You face up to 7 years.
No. I don't want to believe that one. Let's just pretend that's not a thing. That video does not exist.
Forget about that video. I mean, thank God that video exists, because public defenders have been screaming about exactly that for years.
Wow.
We all have, I'm telling you, ask any public defender in New York City that is at least into, practicing in the felony land. You start off with misdemeanors and eventually you expand out. And you ask them what's the most ridiculous either injury, cause of injury, that they faced. And most folks will tell you that they've had numerous cases, and I have, where the injury alleged was swelling to the hand or bruised knuckles. One of the most ridiculous injuries was, this scuff to a knee. And this happens frequently, where a person that I was representing was, according to them, and I have every reason to believe it, was stopped and frisked, or stopped unconstitutionally. There was no reason to. It was just a, hey, you come over, and started to run, which they're allowed to do. And during the chase, the cop trips over his own legs and falls on the ground and twists his ankle, or gets a scratch on his ankle or his knee, and that becomes assault in the second degree, mandatory minimum 2 years, max 7.
That's a perfect example, though, that scenario you just laid out, of the reaction to that almost entirely by white people who have very little experience with police officers. When they watch those videos or when they hear a scenario like you just said, it's your fault. If you just would have listened to the police officer and done what he or she said, you wouldn't have been in this situation. I have no mercy or sympathy for you. Mm-hmm. All you had to do was listen to the cop. Why did you run away? Why did you not do what he or she told you? It's your fault.
And the answer is really a question. Have you or anyone you know ever been assaulted by a police officer? Have you or anyone you know had their door knocked down at 6 o'clock in the morning and had their apartment turned upside down only to find nothing? Have you ever walked down the street and been stopped by the police and thrown up against a brick wall and had a stranger's hands rifled through your pockets and down your pants? Have you ever been traumatized by police before? I could go on. And if the answer is no to any of those questions, then they don't have a place to say a thing.
Fair enough. Let me ask you, I know you got to go in a second here, and I hear my dog barking. I don't know what that means. But that's about
it's our alarm clock.
Yeah, that's about as bad as it gets in the suburbs. But I want to ask you about this campaign that you're involved with, Gasping for Justice. What is happening at Prince George's County Jail?
What's happening in Prince George's County is a lot of what's happening across jails and prisons all throughout the country, which is just business as usual, deliberate indifference only. The conditions that were already horrific are even worse because there's a deadly virus and disease traveling through. There's an inability to social distance. Asymptomatic people are being caged next to symptomatic people. The walls are covered with blood, mucus, vomit that they are being forced to clean up when someone else is taken away who's symptomatic. They are forced to pay $4 to be seen by a doctor. And these are people who are incarcerated pre-trial, presumed innocent because they can't afford to pay bail. A lot of folks in PG County are over-detained, so they've been authorized for release by judges, but the jail is refusing to release them until they determine that they are not contagious. And what's happening beyond that, so the conditions are horrible, and everyone in a position of power to do something, from the so-called progressive, self-titled, quote-unquote, progressive state's attorney, the top prosecutor, Aisha Braveboy, who has a wonderful hashtag on social media that she loves promoting called Brave Justice, to the judges who have begun to, and now for months, have been issuing boilerplate denial decisions to release motions to get people out who are especially vulnerable, to the Obama-nominated federal judge, Paula Zinnes, who is overseeing the civil rights lawsuit brought on behalf of everyone currently detained and founded upon over 60 sworn declarations that individuals incarcerated risked retaliation to file. They are doing nothing. The prosecutor is refusing to advocate for release. The judges are denying release, like to say on a kind of default basis. And this federal judge, who is, again, kind of progressive, she's a liberal judge, people would say, Obama nominated, she called these sworn declarations unhelpful. She called these sworn declarations only marginally relevant and complained that she couldn't separate the chaff from the wheat. And so what this project does, Gasping for Justice, is it's a partnership with the public defenders who represent the people on the inside and who are collecting these sworn declarations, Civil Rights Corps, this organization that brought this lawsuit on behalf of them, and a local organization called Life After Release that runs a bail fund and that does a range of amazing work to take these sworn declarations, which are now being read by an audience of one, this judge in the civil rights case, and translate this text on page, this lawsuit, which is, by the way, very powerfully written, but no one's going to read it, into the masses. And so what we did was reach out to a range of actors, actresses, advocates, writers, Broadway actors, theater people, et cetera, to read each one of these sworn declarations so that more people would hear what was going on. And with the action points of calling on the state's attorney, Aisha Braveboy, to actually advocate for release, to set up a court watch program and get people to volunteer to now, at this point, remotely view what's going on in court to hold the judges accountable, and also to give money to the bail fund. And I've been really pleased with the response so far. Again, the goal of all these things is not just to raise awareness, but it's to get people to take action. We've had over 1 million views of all the videos across platforms. We've went from one court watch volunteer in 4 days to 150. And they have a whole court watching program that they're training folks around the country to start doing. And we've raised close to $20,000 for the bail fund.
That's awesome. Everybody should check this out. It's a really, really important campaign, and you're doing awesome work. It's GaspingForJustice.org. Do I have that right? I just lost it.
That's right.
GaspingForJustice.org. Do you need court watchers because there's no local journalism anymore?
We need court watchers because it turns out, and this is not just in PG County, but a growing trend across the country, this court watch idea. There's a language of court, and even journalists who go in and can report often don't know what's happening. Things happen really fast. Right. They speak in the language of court. They speak in penal law codes. And what's what's kind of brilliant about court watching is they train you on the language of court, and they give you a very kind of clean and clear like checklist of things to listen to that then gets sent to the centralized hub that can be used for reporting, for social media, et cetera. And so it turns everyone into not just a criminal justice reporter, but to an expert on the language of the hearing process, like the bail hearing process, to ensure that these judges can't continue with business as usual and continue hurting people. And it happened, it occurred before COVID. It's happening during, obviously, and hopefully it'll grow after. But I will say, you brought up journalism. Journalism is a major kind of a major cause of the current crisis that we're in. When I say the current crisis, I'm talking about mass incarceration. It was the way that we got here was not just leaders doing bad. It was journalists continuing to kind of peddle the lies that they were telling about the way that we should solve crime, make our streets safer. And it continues today. And with what we're seeing right now with reporters kind of taking the bait of Trump and the Republicans about the mayhem that's going on in liberal cities, and not writing more nuanced articles about why there might be more shootings, that it actually has nothing to do with the fact that police are focusing on protests. It has nothing to do with the police at all. There's a range of other causes, including actually over-policing and investing in policing in jails instead of communities. So
there's so much more to talk about. I know I got to let you go. I really appreciate your time, Scott, and the work that you're doing. And I hope that everybody listening will check out your organization, Zealous, zello.us. All of the information is in the show links for today's podcast. Follow Scott on Twitter at Scott Heck, and definitely check out GaspingForJustice.org. And I hope you and I can talk again as soon as you're available.
Let's do it. Tomorrow? It's a Saturday, but
what time do you get up?
I got a 4.5-year-old, so it could be as early as 5. I'll give you a call.
He or she should join us. I'm sure your son or daughter is outraged at all of the injustice.
I'm surprised. He is. I'm surprised he hasn't walked in right now, but he's very proud of his daddy for being a public defender.
He should be.
He likes how to get people out of jail.
That's awesome. You're a hero, and I really appreciate you joining me. Thanks a lot, Scott.
All right, good. Take good care.
All right, that is Scott Heckinger at Scott Heckinger on Twitter, and check out his organization, Zealous, which I just mentioned, and all these plugs will be in the show notes as well for this podcast, as well as in the Patreon links as well. So check that out. And now my conversation with Ellie Velshi. Let's get right to it. We talked for about an hour. We covered a lot of ground. I love this guy like a brother. He is a good friend to me. And I love watching him on TV where he asks the best questions, and he can do anything. He can cover natural disasters, terrorist attacks, police violence, protesters, you name it. This guy's done it. He's simply one of the best. He's a class act with a tremendous amount of integrity. He's on Twitter at Ali Velshi. Let him know you heard him here. Here's our conversation right now. All right, there he is, the great Ali Velshi, the man who does not sleep, the man who is now filling in almost every time slot, and as well as his own weekend show. Thank you for joining me.
Always my pleasure, my friend. I was a little worried I might not see you because I got up this morning and the power was out in my house, which meant there was no internet, but it came back, so we're good. That's scary for anybody for temporary reasons and obvious reasons, but for a guy who's broadcasting, are you still broadcasting from there? Yeah. So I live between Philadelphia and New York, meaning in both places, and I have studios at home in both places. But in New York, the power virtually never goes out. I live in the suburbs of Philadelphia, so it's a lot of trees. I don't really know because there wasn't any storm last night, but middle of the night, the power went out. So in the before times, you're right. It's just sort of a bit of an inconvenience. In these times, there are two issues. One is the TV that I have to do from here because there's no power, there's no internet, we can't broadcast. But more importantly, like everybody else, we have way more food than we've ever had before. So, where my mind goes to TV, my wife's mind immediately goes to what are we going to do with all the food? And you start thinking about where we can store food in different places and who's got freezer space. And we're the only people in the neighborhood without a generator, right? Because everybody's got generators around here. They're expensive. All right, you lose power 3-4 days a year. It is what it is. And in the before times, it was fine because if you lose power for a couple of days, so what? You live with it. A little inconvenient in the summer when it's too hot. In the winter, you just wear extra clothes. But now with the food, it becomes a whole different issue.
Your wife told me that you honestly suggested, I'll just eat it all before it goes bad. Is that accurate?
Why not? It's thawed. It's there. I got no problem with it because when I'm not in the same place as my wife, we all learn things about our behavior during coronavirus, right? And what you could do with and what you could do without. You and I never really understood why everybody was so excited to get back to their hairdressers, but we learned these things. My eating habits are very different when I'm in New York alone than when I am here with my wife. Like we eat healthy food. She actually cooks real meals and things like that. And I claim to do the same, but there's nothing that I eat that's not packaged and in multiples. Like if I have waffles, I'll eat all the waffles today. Or if I'm, I eat everything. Like there's no care to how I treat myself.
Do you order out in New York, given the situation these days?
Less than I used to. Oh. I used to. I buy groceries a lot. It's just that I buy the things that you can take out, pop in the microwave or pop into the toaster. I mean, it tends to be pretty basic stuff.
How do you buy groceries when you're always on my fucking television all the time?
I'm actually putting a fresh direct order in as we speak.
They deliver. There you go.
It works really well. It's fine. Like we make do, but it's a crazy life because it's a lot of TV.
What are you teaching?
Yeah. So not for the summer, but I start again in September and I finished in the spring term. I teach at Wharton and it was a Monday morning class. So I would teach from 9 to 10:20. I'd get on a 10:45 train in Philadelphia, be in New York by 12:15. And at the time when I started teaching, I anchored a 1 p.m. show with Stephanie Rule. So I'd pull into Penn Station, 12:15. I'd be on TV at 1 o'clock. So those are fun times. We're going to be remote this fall, but I'm still teaching the same slot. It's Wharton students, and it's business communications. It's sort of like a better version of the elevator pitch, right? How do you communicate in this world where so much is done digitally? So actually, it becomes uniquely relevant that we're now teaching class online, right? Because now all of their communication is going to be on. Most of it was anyway, but now it really is. And so it's a great, great course. It really helps me because the things that I have to teach them about pitching their ideas are relevant to the way I present TV.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would love to sit in your class. But I mean, you're teaching a course at one of the most respected business schools, MBA programs, right, in the country, at University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school. That's pretty impressive. What are your?
They wouldn't have let me on the campus as a student. Let me tell you.
Stop that. What are your students like? And I want to get into the question. If you want to jump into it, I'll lead you to it. The immigration debate, because I know you had a really good monologue on MSNBC this week about that in terms of this really terrible decision that I think they walked back.
Very quickly. And I'm kind of puzzled as to why the administration walked this student visa thing back, because I don't know who in Trump's base, which is all he seems to have now, would care that he lets immigrant students in or not. So I suspect there might have been a donor involved in this, or someone with a friend whose kid goes to an Ivy. I don't know. I'm just guessing because I'm trying to figure out the motivation. But I have a very small class. There's no more than 8 people in these classes.
Oh,
They're
wow.
very direct and hands-on.
Oh, cool.
And I have at least 1 to 2 in that 8. So 25% of the class is international. It's Wharton. I teach in the undergraduate school. So Wharton has an MBA program and an undergraduate business program. So I teach the undergrads, and it's an attractive thing for international students to study. American universities in general are attractive to international students. So it's really great. Like, I think it's terrific for the rest of my students. I think it's terrific for America that these people come here and they want to study and are probably inclined to stay. Sometimes the only reason they're not inclined to stay is because we don't make it easy for them to stay, right? You can graduate from an American university and not be able to get a green card, which is just weird because all Western countries have what's called a negative replacement rate, right? More people die than are born. So left to your own devices without immigration, the population would actually shrink. And when you talk about increasing GDP is a function, that's the sort of all of our economic output. Well, think about it. You don't have to be an economics expert to understand that GDP is a function of how many people you have and how productive they are. Now, we're all really productive, right? We've got phones. We've got 2 phones. We all work long hours. We do that stuff. So you've squeezed about as much productivity as you can out of humans. So the only way you increase your economic growth is more humans. And we don't have lots of children these days. So we need immigration. And the funny thing about this administration is when Donald Trump first ran, he talked, and it's a horrible expression. I hate using it because it's just racist and terrible, but he talked about bad hombres. And the implication, other than the fact that they were going to be brownish and Latino, the implication is bad people who commit crimes. Now, that's not actually a real reflection of immigration in America. But more importantly, we didn't go after the bad people. We actually went after the DACA kids who only ever lived here, have to have a job, can't have committed a felony, have to be in school. And then we go after the international students. It's like, who do you like exactly? I mean, these are the people you'd pick if you were picking.
Why do you say we didn't go after the bad people? Didn't ICE what makes you say we didn't go after the criminals?
We didn't make it the focus. So there was the Trump administration and John Kelly when he was ICE or when he was Homeland Security. They all said if you haven't committed a felony or you haven't committed a crime, you're not in danger. We're not gonna get rid of you. That's not where our priority is. They didn't repeat Donald Trump's racist term bad hombres, but they basically said, we're going to only look for the dangerous people. Remember, Donald Trump implied that Mexicans are rapists and criminals. Again, remarkable misrepresentation, but at least his point was that we're going to go out after racists and criminals. But they went after everybody. They went after people who've been in this country for 30 years, not documented, but their kids are in American colleges. They've worked without felonies. And these people had a relationship with the government, by the way. They check in, right? There's a real formality in some cases to being an undocumented immigrant in America. And they'd go for their check-in and they'd literally be arrested on the spot and deported within days. Kind of just dumb, right? We've learned that, and the pandemic has taught us that we depend on immigration in ways we didn't even think, like the people who do deliver your groceries or your food in many cases might be undocumented. That's who we are. So I'm surprised that this turned around, but I worry that a lot of people in this country don't understand their relationship to immigrants, whether they're legal immigrants or illegal immigrants. They don't really get it, right? Because we think food comes from the grocery store. We don't know who picks that food, who farms that food, who delivers that food, who prepares that food, and who builds our houses.
I'm laughing. I'm only laughing because you said you worry. I mean, yeah, it's a huge problem that people have no idea about who's doing the work. And we're so disconnected from the chain of custody of these products. By the time we get them, we don't know whose hands touched them, where they were grown, and so on. But people do seem to be starting to understand a little bit because of the pandemic.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm from Canada, right? And in Canada in 1968, 69, the prime minister was Lester Pearson, and his number 2 was Pierre Trudeau. And then Pierre Trudeau became the president, the father of Justin Trudeau. And this is 69-ish or so. And they did the math. They said, negative replacement rate, not enough people, big country, we'll never punch above our weight in Canada, so let's go look for immigrants. And they went around the world actively recruiting immigrants, refugees, by the way, refugees. They went out there, they said, hey, you know what? There's no better immigrant than people who feel unsafe in their own home. So we got them. Canada, Toronto, where I grew up, and it was like this really, really white place when I grew up. And then suddenly there were waves. The Italians had already been there, then Jamaicans and Chinese and and it changed the entire texture and flavor of Canada into the country it is today. So every Canadian of my age understands that short of immigration, Canada could have muddled along as a sort of also ran country. Immigration made it a great country. So we don't have this view in Canada about immigrants being dangerous and criminals and things like that. We have this view, and nobody loves the Muslim ban more than Canadians do, because students from Yemen and Syria and Iraq, you know who we were letting into our universities? The best of the best now go to Canada to study, or the UK, or other places in Europe or Asia. Everybody else got a big boon out of America hating immigrants.
Yeah, it's a really interesting history. I didn't know any of that. I actually didn't know how much ethnic diversity there was in Canada until I was, I think, a few years into my Sirius XM show, and I had so many Canadian listeners. It was such a great thing about that show, is that you had so many international, specifically Canadians. So when we were talking about immigration or healthcare, you'd always hear from Canadians, and it's always why your perspective is so great on things too. You always are good to bring that up. I always love it when you have a guest that tries to say something, doesn't happen too often, about Canada, and has no idea that you were born there. Those are some of my favorite moments.
That happens every now and then. They try and talk to me about healthcare in Canada, about all the lines and all the Canadians who are always rushing to America for healthcare. Show me one.
Yeah, exactly. Does the equation, the unemployment situation given the pandemic and this historic unemployment, does that change the equation, do you think, on immigration in terms of now nobody has a job, so maybe some people are going to be doing lesser jobs, if you will, forgive my rhetoric there, the lesser skilled jobs or something like that normally the undocumented or documented immigrants will be doing? Does it change the equation given the historic unemployment on the narrative you just gave about immigration and employment?
It does. And I'll tell you why I don't think it does. Because fundamentally what the pandemic has done is it's exposed flaws, right? It's exposed the idea that so many people, there's a study that came out this week that said people who earn minimum wage in this country, and remember the federal minimum wage is still $7.25. A lot of states have minimum wages that are higher, up to $15 an hour. But for people who earn the minimum wage in this country, they cannot afford to rent a one-bedroom apartment in 95% of American counties.
Wow.
Right? That's just a flaw. That's just something wrong with society. You have all these companies complaining that if the federal unemployment insurance supplement, the $600, up to $600 a week continues, they can't get their workers back because their workers make more money on unemployment than they make working. Well, that's a flaw. If your workers make more money on unemployment than you pay them, you're not paying them enough. And I get it that individual businesses, the local gas station, local bodega may not feel that they're in a position to increase the wages of their employees from $8 an hour to $12 or $15. I get it. But there's something wrong with society. When people don't have health care, when people can't rent a one-bedroom apartment on a minimum wage, they can't have a family. We just have to fix that. Now, if you fix that, you're going to go back. You'll bounce back to the low unemployment that we had, and we'll still have the same structural problems. We're still going to be short of workers in this country.
I want to talk with you about a separate issue now, which is, I think, really important. You gave a TED Talk. When did this post? In May, I guess. I see it's posted. But I don't know when you gave the TED Talk, but it's titled How Fake News Grows in a Post-Fact World. So you're uniquely qualified to talk about it because of what you do for a living, of course. I'm super concerned about how fast the QAnon type of conspiracies are spreading. And I've always been talking about these issues. Even when I first started my show at SiriusXM in 2008, I was really worried about conspiracy theories and how many people really believed in them, where a lot of my friends in kind of corporate media, mainstream media, were like, they're just fringe, including my policy expert friends that aren't in media. They're fringe. Don't worry about them. Well, the President of the United States is a leading conspiracy theorist in the country, and now we have all kinds of crazy things happen. This past week, it was Wayfair.com is selling kids. So my question to you is there any way to measure how fast or deep a crazy theory has spread? Because there's a frighteningly large percentage of people who identify as Republicans that also believe in a lot of this QAnon stuff and a lot of the anti-science stuff, and forget about the president's lies. What are your thoughts on how bad that's gotten, how pervasive it is, and how fast it's actually happening? Because, I'm talking about the pandemic ramps it up, and it seems like in the past 2 months, it's really gone crazy.
Well, I watched one of these videos last night. It was 6 minutes long, and the production value on it was amazing.
Yes, that's important.
Kooky thing. But so Brandy Zadrozny and Ben Collins, who work at MSNBC, they track these things.
Yeah, they're great.
They explain how these things get mainstream, right? How they go from being what was fringe into mainstream. And the way it sort of works is it'll show up on, there are a few key sites for these things. And then Alex Jones will have it on, and he has a lot of followers. And then Rush Limbaugh will pick it up. And from Rush Limbaugh, it'll make its way to Hannity or somebody on Fox. And at that point, it's like money laundering, right? You've laundered a crazy idea because it has moved its way up the food chain of legitimacy to the point that it's on Fox, which a lot of mainstream conservative people think is mainstream news. They think it's like watching the conservative version of MSNBC, except it's not, because they peddle in these conspiracy theories and they mainstream them. And then Trump retweets these things. But
that production quality point you made I'm glad you made that, because I've always said that too. When it's so much easier to produce. Look, I made there be a control room behind me, and now I'll get rid of it. It's so easy to just, there, it's gone. I mean, you can make anything happen, and it's free. I mean, these apps are free. The point being,
right?
Things are more believable. That's more peaceful behind me. Things are more believable when there's high production quality. That matters so much. I'm glad you.
It's easy to write off conspiracy theories when there's spelling errors and they look like manifestos and death threats and uppercase and lowercase and nonsense and clearly doctored photos. But you can't tell today what a doctored photo is or a doctored video. You're right. For free, for basically nothing on your phone, you can create these high quality videos that look like they're news. So you look at the Lincoln Project, this group of conservatives who are against Trump. They drop a few commercials every week. Very, very high production values.
Yeah.
Like just amazing work. This thing that I watched last night looked like that. Like it was really great effects. And it was talking about how the deep state brought the coronavirus in. I mean, it was crazy stuff. Like it was so well done for 6 minutes. And I know that people I know were passing it around, not as if to say, look at these kooks. It was to actually talk about. I have people connected to me who say things like coronavirus is up because of more testing. Well, are more people dead because of more testing? Like, I don't understand that. But that's what happens. And by the way, Pete, it's not Trump. It's been 30 or 40 years of diminishing the role of science, of expertise, of academia, of intellectualism, of sowing ignorance and merchants of doubt, right? It was the cigarette industry. It's the climate industry. Ignorance is now a badge you wear, right? Rather than saying, I'm going to study and get smart about this, I don't like the experts. They're all elitists. They're part of the whole deep state. They're part of the establishment. And Donald Trump has dovetailed with these people. Right. He's created a sense that I get you. I hear you. I don't like the experts. That's why I stare into an eclipse. That's where I tell people that they can drink bleach and stuff like that. That's where we are now.
Do you think there's any way? I completely agree with that assessment. It's a super important point that you make about experts and institutions losing credibility. Do you see any solution to that? Like in the post-Trump world, is there any? I think there are, nuggets of reasons as to why institutions have lost so much faith. And it's the wealth gap. It's the Iraq war. It's the collapse of the economy in 2008. And how come government and institutions didn't protect us? And now it's the pandemic. How did we let this happen? And the only answer is we didn't let it happen. By the way, they made it happen. They made the virus in a lab and then they sprayed it all over us.
There are two things that have happened in tandem. One is all of those things that you just described. The idea that why were we uncritical about the Iraq war? Why are we uncritical? Why do we accept what the government has to say? And then there's people like me in the media who would put two guests on other sides, even when there aren't two sides to an issue. We needed to achieve balance. We needed to achieve what we believe to be objectivity, which is a remarkable boon for climate deniers, a remarkable boon for people who say cigarettes don't give you cancer, a remarkable boon for nut jobs who self-publish their books because they get equal time. They get to be there. And we've done this until now. I mean, it's only now are we able to say that it is not about fairness and objectivity for us not to give airtime to people who have crazy conspiracy theories, right? We actually have to curate that. Our viewer deserves my curation of this kind of stuff. And we got away for a long time. I'm talking we writ large in media, got away for a long time with saying, as long as I put all the views on, it's okay. I'm not taking a position. I'm not imposing my views on anyone. So you win in that situation if you're fringe. You win in that situation if you don't hold views that are peer reviewed or things like that, because you can get on cable TV. And that's what happened. We put them on cable TV and now they're legitimate.
Well, let's talk about where we're at now. Your show, Velshi, is on Saturdays and Sundays, 8 a.m. And you're on TV all week, working with, filling in for others, I guess, coming up prime time. I saw you in for Rachel the other night. By the way, I saw a hilarious comment, critical of you when you said, you tweeted, I'm in for Maddow tonight. And somebody after the first segment said, are you going to stop yelling or something? And then you literally I'll tone it down. Is this better? You listen to some random guy on Twitter. It was a very funny interaction. I couldn't even believe that you replied to the guy. I loved it.
I'm a little loud.
So How much do you reach out to the administration, and how often do they say yes to join you in any time slot that you're on?
I don't reach out a lot, and usually when I do, they'll often give me somebody. This is where that curating comes in. There's a piece of me that says, this is the president of the United States. It's the administration. You need to hear from them. Yeah. Even if it sounds crazy to you, you need to hear from them. And the other piece of me that says, am I amplifying stuff that doesn't make sense? So a couple of weeks ago, I had Peter Navarro on.
I watched it.
It's a little bit bonkers, right? I mean, it was a crazy interview. We was talking about everything that's gone wrong with our society is due to the Communist Party of China, and they bred this virus, and then they put hundreds of thousands of people on planes to Italy and America. What do I do with that stuff, right? Because on one hand, while that interview is going on, I'm wrestling with is this useful to my viewers to see that your White House has people who say this kind of stuff and think this way, or is it really not useful?
The other thing I feel like I saw you wrestling with is, and I've been this way a lot with guests who are being pretty absurd, is, do I push back on every point, or do I give this person all the rope they need to say crazy shit? And I think you did more of the latter, because the reactions to that interview when it hit social media were, he's bonkers. Like a lot of serious policy experts.
A lot of people said, why didn't you challenge this? Why didn't you challenge it? And I said, well, the velocity of what he was saying, when they were coming at me, at 60 miles an hour, it's like, I can't, there would be no conversation. I would just be saying, what'd you say? What Chinese, put him on plane? What are you talking about? So I generally arrived at the conclusion that it would be better to just let him say his piece and then let you, the viewer, decide based on what he said and the expression on my face, what happened. But there are a lot of viewers who hate that. They say that was irresponsible. You let him have, a 5-minute segment on TV to spout irresponsible untruths. So I get it. I hear all sides on this one. I hear why people don't think it should happen. And I still am not sure that I think it's useful for people to not know what the people in the White House who have the ear of the president are actually saying.
I want to ask you, obviously, talk to you about the pandemic and public health policy, or whatever there is of policy in general. But specifically, I want to ask you about this reporting this week that the CDC suddenly took statistics off of their website. To me, in a way, it's not the sexiest story, but it's probably the most important story regarding COVID-19, the pandemic, and the government handling of it, period, because it's such an overt thing. And I don't know what the precedent is. And before I jump all over it, I want to be like, has any other administration ever done that? Could there be any number of reasons why they wouldn't want to report statistics that they have at the CDC? Right. What's your take on this?
This is where I have always said journalism boils down to just two things: bearing witness, showing people what happened or telling them what happened, and holding power to account. And you can't do one without the other. You cannot hold power to account if you do not have the ability to bear witness, right? If you don't know it happened, you can't hold people to account. So you look at the Yazidis on Mount Sinjar. You look at the situation in Myanmar. You look at Darfur. Unless there was a reporter there to tell you it was going on, you wouldn't know.
Yemen, Syria.
Syria, right? Like one of my favorite movies, Gandhi, where Martin Sheen actually plays a young New York Times reporter reporting on some civil disobedience thing that Gandhi was doing. And the point was that they were doing this thing, and there was just one reporter there, and he called in the dispatch, and then the world found out. And during the protests, the police were trying to impose curfews and threaten media and intimidate media. And I keep explaining to people, you don't have to like media to understand that once we go dark, it goes dark for you. So,
and let me give you one more example. The election day, in terms of reporting at long lines or polls not working, I think that's another really important place where there were people on the scene, not enough, but reporting on it, or else we would have never known what happened at a random polling site in Georgia.
So when you take data off of a government website, where am I supposed to get that information from? Like, what are you meaning that the media should now drop everything else they do and gather statistics? Because you actually do that. That's what the CDC exists to do. What do you get from that? What you get is my ability to challenge their narrative about what's actually happening. Because 2 weeks ago, they were saying, this kind of weird COVID, young people are getting it, nobody's dying. Well, guess what? Now people are dying again. So because normal people would know, having read the statistics, that there's a pattern, right? After everybody gets infected, then deaths go up. That's happening. Well, if you start controlling that, because, the government has now said that they will control that information, not the CDC, which is a sort of an arm's length agency, then they can say whatever they want. They can tell you people aren't dying. They can tell you people aren't getting sick. So we are losing our ability to bear witness unless I literally phone up every hospital in every county and every municipality in every state in the country and hope they give me accurate.
Well, that's right. No, but just to reiterate your point, what you're saying is that government's role, your local government, your town, your state government, and the federal government's role is to collect statistics on any number of issues so that policymakers, politicians, can use those statistics to create better policy and better outcomes for the public, us.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. Every first Friday of every month, the unemployment number comes out, right? Most people see the percentage. Some people see the number of jobs created, and then they see a couple more statistics, depending on whether you're watching Bloomberg or CNBC. When you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website once a month, and in fact, they release data all the time, it is a wonk's dream, right? It's just they publish every kind of data every way. I can tell you how many people with a W in their name got a job on a Tuesday after 4 p.m. The government doesn't do much with that information, but the whole concept of an open government, a government of the people, is we'll collect it because we have all sorts of ways of collecting, including the census. You then come up, you academics, you smart people, come up with policies. And when you don't do it, you have Russia. When you don't do it, you have China. When you don't do it, you have Syria. You have all these places where there's no way to come up with better policies, and there's no way to hold the government to account. So when the government all of a sudden tells you that 74,000 people who died yesterday, who got coronavirus, it's not true. It was actually 24,000. What do I do about that information if I have no way to challenge them?
Yeah, a better example than the BLS numbers, and not to upgrade your example, would be public health issues and putting aside the virus. We can talk about guns. Like gun violence. We don't have statistics on gun violence because the gun lobby doesn't want that. But government should have statistics on how many people die of guns, car accidents, lead poisoning, choking, whatever it is, so that doctors, physicians, public health experts, the pharmaceutical company, all the interested parties, the public mainly, can know how to handle things, where the risks are.
The handling of information is like the silencing of media. It's just one of the worst things that a government can do.
How does this get handled then by you and everybody else in the press corps? This one issue, how do you look at the Trump administration or the CDC and ask them if you had one here a question about that? Because they have to. This is an egregious thing they've done to hide the statistics.
Yeah, so there's a lot of layers to how we do this. First of all, we get some access to the CDC, generally speaking, at the White House briefings, but that's a little bit limited and curtailed these days. We speak to a lot of former heads of the CDC. In fact, 4 of them wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post on Monday about a bunch of issues, including this one. And then we interview them to talk about the very things that you and I are talking about, to say, why is it so important? And then there's context to this, right? It's not just this. The government, this is part of a larger effort by this administration to sideline the CDC. So it's not just the publishing of information. It's the idea that we have a world-renowned organization in Atlanta that is at the tip of the spear on dealing with infectious diseases. We've been cutting funding. We've been underfunding them. We've been politicizing it. And now this is what happens. And this is the perfect example. So we discuss it on a lot of levels, but fundamentally it is just one more installment in a problem that we have been seeing going on for a while and in sharper relief during the pandemic.
Right. But I mean, it would seem that it's different than all of the rest of those problems. Hiding the statistics on COVID-19, it puts a blindfold on public health officials, epidemiologists.
Good news is, in anticipation of this, there was a group that got started called the COVID Project, where they track these things independently. So we now have about 3 to 4 different ways of tracking these numbers. So every day before every show I do, my assistant, whom you know, Emma, sends me a document that says global coronavirus cases, global coronavirus deaths, U.S. coronavirus cases, U.S. coronavirus deaths. And that one document, she often sends me 3 versions of it, 3 different groups that follow the same thing. And the numbers are always off by a little bit because of the methodology and the time lag in tracking, but I have 3 ways to compare. So I'm losing one, and arguably it's the most important one, but we've got Johns Hopkins that is not governed by
that's actually, I'm so glad you said that. So it's not just, we were talking about it, that it should be the government's role. They have to do it, but it's not, but it's also in the interest of universities and other organizations to measure these things. So what you're saying is the CDC is not the only institution counting the statistics. Johns Hopkins.
It doesn't excuse any of this, because you should be trusting your government to give you good information. I don't have any relationship with Johns Hopkins to be able to trust them or know them, but I'm glad they're doing it. And there's a separate thing called the COVID Project. So there is tracking of this, so we can still, if the government's numbers all of a sudden seem to go askew because they're not releasing it on the CDC, but Trump's saying them at the White House, we should be able to say, by the way, that's not what Johns Hopkins is saying. But we shouldn't have to depend on that. You shouldn't be protecting yourself. You shouldn't have to protect yourself from your own government.
Well, it's just a weird, stupid thing to do, too. It's like they're hiding the statistics to make it harder, but other people have them. So what are it's just going to backfire. It already has, I think. So the other really important issue from this past week, and our conversation here is going to be posting for Monday's episode, and you'll have already done your show, and maybe you're on the weekend, and maybe you slept an hour, but maybe you're talking about this, maybe you aren't. I'm sure that you will be. Is schools opening? And this week, I would love to have you have these guys on, because I know them personally. I've done a lot of work with them. The Florida Education Association. I interviewed the president and vice president. And I think what I said to them is all eyes are on Florida because of two reasons, really three. But one, the spike there is worse than anywhere. Two, their schools in Florida and other states as well, but in Florida where the spike is high, open August 14th. And three, I would add, they're in shit shape with schools. My friends at the FEA have been advocating for educators, obviously, for years, but it's a right to work state, or work for less, as I say, state. So unions aren't very strong, so they don't have the power. The teachers there, my final point is, they can't just say we're not going to school the way they can in some of the other states where unions are tough. So how concerned are you? How much are you talking about?
I talk about this topic every week, because I think it's, first of all, it's one of the most important. Secondly, it's one that touches everybody, because anybody who had kids home in the spring understands if you didn't respect teachers, you do now, right? Trying to educate your own kids.
I wouldn't go that far, but I hope you're right. Go ahead.
Florida's got a fourth problem, and that is that none of this is accidental. It didn't have to happen this way, right? There's a governor there who continues to deny what is obvious, right? That masks and social distancing work. But I think that this teacher issue is remarkably serious. And in fact, I'm talking to one of the major national union leaders, teachers union leaders on Sunday, Lily Escalon Garcia.
She's great.
I just think the pandemic has made everything we knew to be bad worse, right? We knew we had a problem with wages. Now we realize how serious it is. We knew we had a problem with universal health care. Now we know how serious it is. We knew we had problems with housing affordability. Now we know how serious it is.
You knew you had problems with your marriage. Relationships. Yeah.
But the public school funding thing has been going on for decades, right? We have been underfunding our public schools for decades, to the extent that some schools do not have hot water to allow for the necessary washing. Most schools don't have air conditioning, and they don't have the facilities to do these things. So,
and now sorry to interrupt you, but now the air conditioning, if they do have it, is a problem, because as I talk to these guys, ventilation and the virus, they have to clean it all the time. Sorry, go ahead.
But imagine what going to school in Florida in August looks like, right? So my argument is, let's not get back to normal with schools. Right. Normal's not that good in America. We need to figure this out better than normal. And for God's sake, I totally get it. Kids have to be at school. I get that you can't have a child lose their education. We also can't kill them in the process. This is just irresponsible. So we do, and that's the problem. It becomes this binary thing, right? If I don't agree that Donald Trump should cut funding to schools if they don't open on time, that must mean that I'm anti-school opening. I'm absolutely not anti-school opening. I want schools to open the second they are ready, and probably go into overtime to make up for the time lost, but not a second before they're ready, because we tried to open up the damn country too early, and look what happened.
It's a preposterous argument, because there is absolutely nobody. I'm sure there's somebody, but I can't think of anybody who wins if schools stay closed, because parents can't go to work. Teachers have kids.
We don't have childcare in this country. That's the other problem. So you don't even have in Canada. You can keep schools shut for that issue, because parents have ways of getting childcare for their kids on a level playing
field. Affordable childcare. Yeah.
affordable childcare. Yep. So we haven't solved any of these problems. It's not, and everybody who knows kids know that they go around doing this and touching everybody. We can't have this happen. We need to protect our kids. We need to protect our kids from each other, and we need to protect our teachers and get this right. But Pete, it takes a special kind of person to mess this up as much as our administration has messed this up, because there are 60 examples around the country of countries who have gotten this right. We chose not to. So let's stop making the wrong decisions.
Yeah, I mean, so when the president doesn't want to have any responsibility, he's basically said a lot. He said that he's going to let the states decide. And then, especially in the Republican states, sorry to be partisan, but it seems to be accurate in those states. And I mean, I actually think Republicans don't like to govern and they're not good at it, but that's quite a generalization. But in those states, they're just not governing. So in Florida and in Texas and now in Georgia as well, I guess, this asshole, sorry, but is saying, I don't want to govern. Let the counties decide. But you can't do a piecemeal public health policy solution,
let alone on a state level where there are no boundaries or nothing. Right. So George is a unique case. He's suing the mayor of Atlanta, about being too liberal about the masks.
Too liberal.
So here's the thing.
Like that's a liberal conservative thing.
Who've done the right thing. Larry Hogan in Maryland, Mike DeWine in Ohio. So it is uniquely Republicans who are on the wrong side of this, but it's only some. And you mentioned these three in particular, where Georgia, Florida, and Texas and Arizona. Weird, just weird. There's public health evidence, mountains and mountains of it on this side, and they're just choosing to be on the other side because of some weird interpretation of civil rights and liberties, which doesn't extend to anything else, by the way. Your civil liberties do not extend to your ability to harm me by, the mask is about protecting the other person. So this is weird, it's perverse, and it's killing people.
So there's also this idea. I was talking to this really bright guy, if you haven't had him, Jared Yates Sexton. I mean, just brilliant he pointed out this, he wrote a whole book about, masculinity and the issues with it, and that, wearing a mask. And I think that's a Trump thing to some extent. It makes you look weak.
It's just a damn mask. I don't even understand it. Is it a little uncomfortable? Yeah, because I go through life not wearing a mask, but I'm totally happy to do it. Doctors and dentists have done. It's just not, you know what I mean? It's just not a thing. Just wear a damn mask. It's not that hard.
I wish you would wear a mask during your broadcast, because I think your bottom half of your face is your worst half.
Right. Exactly. Totally. The problem is I'm not as expressive with the top half of my face.
I know it's so hard to let people know you're smiling or that you approve or disapprove of what they're saying with just your eyes. I'm under my mask, I'm always way over. I'm now do you see me?
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
No, I agree with you. But it's just, it's just, why did we make a thing out of this? It's just not that hard. We just know how to do things. This is not as hard as, but remember, they fought helmets on motorcycles and people still don't wear them. They fight seatbelts in cars. Right. These are public health issues. This is those are different in that, there are instances, but generally you're only hurting yourself if you're not wearing a helmet unless you come flying through my windshield. Except that you use up my emergency room and you use up public resources and things like that. But I agree with you. You're generally not as much of a menace to society. But here you're actually being a menace to society. Yeah. Why would you be that person? Why can't you just be kind? I don't want to make other people sick and have them die.
You following the story out of Portland and other cities where you have these unmarked law enforcement officers just snatching people and arresting people off the street and then getting in, strangely enough, rented minivans?
Yeah. But it started outside the White House with those federal
that's right.
law enforcement people who didn't have badges on, didn't have things that identified what branch of government they were from or badges. This is terrible stuff. And I'll just tell you, because I was one of those journalists who was covering the protests who was injured in the protests. I took a rubber bullet to my knee. And there needs to be accountability. I don't actually believe someone aimed at me and shot me. I was in a protest and they were firing into the protest. I don't believe they should be using rubber bullets and tear gas, but they did, and they got me. But it's very hard to be to find accountability when law enforcement, people who are legally allowed to be doing this, don't identify themselves, don't have insignia, and do things like that. Even in places like New York City, where when I was covering the protests in New York, at one point there was a line that was established by police that didn't make sense, because New York has rules as to why a police line is established. And I questioned the police officer, and he didn't give me an appropriate answer. I questioned him a second time, and he said, "One more time, and I'll have you arrested." He didn't use those words, but he said, "One more time, and we'll use some expression." And I clarified. I said, "You mean you'll have me arrested?" We're not allowed to be there, Pete. These people are public servants. They work for us. We are taxpayers. We can't be in a place where law enforcement operates secretly. It's not a sting operation with the approval of a judge. So this Portland thing should worry every American about whether this is a harbinger for law enforcement and the ways in which we don't want things to go, because this mirrors, if I were covering this in another country, it would be very critical, and it would be about the government silencing opposition and silencing critics. That's not what this country is based on. One thing, and it is the freedom of expression. This is silencing critics is not part of the deal we signed up for.
Right, and every authoritarian expert I read and interview is super concerned about the the secret police as now they're being called. You would think that one of those guys would leak and be like, this is who has issued this order. This is what agency we're from. It's surprising that.
It'll come out in time. I mean, these things always do. People are learning to have a conscience, people in law enforcement too. And part of it is that I think they want the message to get out that we're not all as evil as some people think we are, but they have to talk and tell us.
But I mean, like Eric Prince's name is trending on Friday because everybody's wondering, are those private contractors? They're not even government employees. And is Trump flirting with this, private contracting secret police idea that we've seen in lots of other countries in the past?
Yeah. And he is the brother of the education secretary, and he is in this business. And he did try and pitch the government on taking over the entire Afghan war. And he was brought up in the Mueller investigation as going to Seychelles and meeting with somebody, some Russian financier in a bar who he said he didn't really know. So there's murkiness all over the place, which is why transparency is the only defense, right? If people have these theories, the only defense is to have a government that is open and for the people. And what you're seeing in Portland doesn't represent that.
What do you think, if anything, we see of the president's taxes?
It's a good question. I'm fascinated by the degree to which he has been able to avoid the scrutiny of Republicans.
Such a good point. Yeah.
This whole nonsense about I'm under audit and all that kind of stuff. It's not a thing that would prevent you from disclosing your taxes.
Ever.
Weird. So I think he's running out of avenues. I just don't know. It won't probably happen before the election. So I think people have just got to understand that when somebody goes through all this trouble to hide everything all the time and silence people, at some juncture, you just have to make the assumption that there's something bad that's being hidden.
You were tweeting out at Ellie Velshi some polling data this week on the president, and wow, what a gap. And it's such a weird time. We both covered a lot of elections, and it's just so interesting to see the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, not really have to do anything. I guarantee that's his strategy, and I think it's a brilliant strategy, frankly. And he is gaining so much ground on the president in almost every question, approval of the pandemic, even approval of the economy. So what do you make of it? I mean, because that a lot of people will say, well, polls don't matter and they were wrong, but they really weren't wrong. They were very close to right. And we have an electoral college where in a couple states they were still close to right, but somehow he eked it out. But
people seem to forget that Hillary Clinton did get more votes than Donald Trump did. I worry about two things, right? One is, what does this polling information do to Donald Trump supporters? Does it energize them? And what does it do to people who don't like Donald Trump, who maybe don't love Joe Biden and say, well, okay, pressure's off. I don't actually have to cast my ballot for Joe Biden because clearly he's gonna clean up. Remember, Pete, elections tend to be close in this country, even when they don't look close. And if this election is close, and we're looking at absentee ballots and mail-in voting, which, as you know, is not as satisfying for news junkies who like to watch election returns because they don't come in as fast, and it could take days. I think the president, in his criticism of China and Navarro's criticism of the Chinese Communist Party and his criticism of mail-in ballots, is setting up to delegitimize the results of the election. And he may have days to weeks in which to do so. So I think you've got two things going on.
Days to weeks after November 3rd.
Remember this 2018 election? Yep. It was a month before we had before you realize how big the Democratic victory in the House was. It almost looked on election night like it had fizzled.
Remember the 2000 election.
Right. So he uses that. And then you've got people who, if he doesn't concede the election, I think Americans are very frustrated and they've learned the power of protest. So I think you're going to see two strains that could come together very uncomfortably. Donald Trump not conceding defeat in an election, and Americans worried that he's not going to concede defeat in an election. So the polling is interesting in that he bottoms out in about the 35-36% range in a number of those polls. And I think that's Donald Trump's bottom, right? I think, as you and I have discussed, 22 or 23% of people think Barack Obama is a Kenyan-born Muslim. And that in this conversation, there is a Kenyan-born Muslim. 26 or 27% believe in UFOs. So to get from 27% to 37% is not that much of a stretch, right? That's kind of where Donald Trump bottoms out. But in this polling, 110 or 12 days from the election, he seems to be at his bottom. So that's still 3 months to not be at the bottom. I mean, maybe tomorrow Donald Trump decides he's all about masks and social distancing. I don't know.
You got to get rid of that UFO example, because I think believing in UFOs is a lot more believable than that Hillary Clinton is in charge of a global pedophile ring. I mean, or that Wayfair is selling kids.
I will give you that. It's a bad example. You're right, because there probably are UFOs.
I just want to ask you a completely different question, and maybe listeners wouldn't be interested. I think it's interesting because obviously I'm in the industry, but seeing you pop up at all hours on MSNBC, especially prime time, 7, 8, and 9, and of course you're on every weekend. You used to be on every single day during the week. But you're filling in for just about everybody. And I just kind of wonder, and I asked you if I could ask you this before, because I don't think it's incriminating in any way, but that must be really hard to work with all of those different executive producers and show teams. How much does that differ? How much does your approach differ when you're stepping into Rachel Maddow or Chris Hayes or Lawrence's seat?
It's a good question. It's like Airbnb. I don't rearrange the furniture. Right. Yeah. If I go in to do Rachel's show, I want to bring the audience the closest thing to Rachel Maddow that I can. So my reads, my expressions, my things that I say, the way I pause and read will sound more like her. Lawrence's show, I do a lot. I do it every Friday anyway. So I know that team very well. I know all these teams. I do their shows all the time. I try, and the teams are always really, really accommodating. Like they'll really, allow me to do whatever I want to do. But my general view is, what do your viewers expect? Because that's what I want to do. I'm holding the place until your host comes back. So it's a fun experience for me, because I get to try out, like most people don't get to try out everybody else's shows and everybody else's furniture. It's like going around and staying in different places. So I like it a lot.
Which of them do you like the most? I'm kidding. So finally, where, I mean, maybe you don't, I'm just making an assumption. You always, you're a private guy, obviously. I know you pretty well, but emotionally, how do you keep it up emotionally? How do you have a source of optimism right now? It seems so hard so many days. I'm very open and transparent about my emotions, publicly, and have been, but how are you dealing, and how do you deal? You have a lot going on in your family.
Yeah, I will say that what was really useful to me was when I went out to cover the protests, because I'd been, like everybody else, sort of locked at home for that time. And then I
Minneapolis?
Went out. Minneapolis. And the hope I saw is what some people saw was fires and clashes with the police. I saw hope. I saw people who said that their ability to be part of a government of the people is not dead, and that they were going to do what they had to do to fix that. And there would be lots of debates about violence and looting and rioting, and lots of reminders that this country was, formed on the basis of protest, much of it violent. But I saw people saying, you can't take this away from me. What George Floyd did is it centered people's passions and their complaints and their frustrations, and made them realize that no one will fix this for me. This is a grown-up problem. We are going to have to take back. If you feel that government has not been fair to you, you now take it back. And I saw that energy, and I thought to myself, and I'd seen it right after the election with the Women's March and certain protests that we had seen, but now I have seen that people are prepared to do this. So with 3 months to go, people are actually saying, I have the power. Protest is reminding them. By the way, protest doesn't mean anything if you don't vote. right? If the protest results in more people voting, then that is success. So people have to remember that. In America, if everybody made sure someone else voted, everybody would vote, and that would be a great outcome. So I'm hopeful because of the protests that I was at. And I saw every part of it. I saw windows getting smashed. I saw buildings being burnt down in front of my eyes. I interviewed people whose businesses were burnt down and whose buildings were burnt down. I've seen every part of this thing. And my one takeaway is hope, that America will reclaim its rightful place, and America will reclaim the honor that it should, the place of honor that it should occupy. So I'm drawing a lot of strength from the power that people are demonstrating.
Love that answer. I knew you'd have a good one. Thank you very much for joining me. Give me a whole hour of your time here today, buddy. And I know you got a billion things to do. I appreciate it, and I will hopefully talk to you privately and publicly soon.
Thank you, my friend.
Bye, bud.
All right, Ali Velshi, at Ali Velshi. Right now, go to Twitter if you're on Twitter and let him know you heard him here and that you appreciated it. Several of you do that almost every episode, and it means a lot because it's hard for a guest to measure how much of an impact they're having. I mean, they're always happy to talk to me, and I'm certainly always honored and happy to talk to them, but it's great when you give them feedback on Twitter. So that's it. Scott Heckinger, at Ali Velshi. Thank you both for joining me again. Thank you to Nick and Michael, who helped me start the Shed Studio. I'm so excited to move out there. This makeshift studio is not where I want to be, but I couldn't do any of it without your support. And when I started this venture, I didn't sink much money into it, but now it's going pretty well. Got a lot of almost 650 paying subscribers. We got to get to 3,000 to really be able to sustain this and ramp up the video, but I'm excited to make my first big investment with this studio. So if you're already subscribing and you can pay more, great. A lot of people have, quote, edited. It's called editing your subscription up $5 or $10 or more. Many of you have done that. I cannot thank you enough. I'll never be able to, but I appreciate your support and trusting me to find these great guests and have these great conversations every single day of the week, but I can't do it without you. So sign up now at patreon.com/PeteDominic or go to the paid subscription link in the show notes, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Every day can be tough. At times, tougher than others. I'm right here with you. You're not alone. We're struggling together. We're going to figure this out together, and I love you. Thank you for listening, everybody. I really appreciate it.